Welcome to Arirang TV's live coverage of the US-ROK-Japan Summit Joint Press Conference. I'm Kim Mo-gyun. Today, President Lee Jae-myung and Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi are meeting at the historic city of Andong in what is being closely watched as another sign of steadily restored shuttle diplomacy between Seoul and Tokyo. The summit comes just 4 months after their previous meeting in Japan's Nara prefecture and marks the 6th meeting between the leaders of the two countries since the launch of the Lee Jae-myung administration, underscoring the growing frequency of high-level communication between the two countries. But this meeting is also unfolding against a rapidly shifting regional backdrop. Just days after the US-China summit, President Donald Trump separately briefed both Seoul and Tokyo on the outcome of those talks, with issues ranging from North Korea to Indo-Pacific security, and now expected to feature prominently in today's discussions. And at the same time, today's summit is also being framed around symbolism and cultural diplomacy as well. Following the talks and joint statement, the two leaders will attend a traditional dinner and take part in Andong's famous 선유주불놀이 performance at the Hahue village, blending diplomacy with Korea's cultural heritage. So what does this summit really tell us about the current direction of Korea-Japan ties, and what should we be watching for moving forward? As we wait for the live coverage, we will speak to Kim Mi-kyung, senior researcher at the Gyeongsang National University's Social Sciences Korea Research Institute, here in the studio with us. A very big welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Professor, as we're waiting for the joint press conference to be held, I wonder, this is the 4th encounter between President Lee and Prime Minister Takaichi. So, first of all, how would you assess the current ties between Seoul and Tokyo?
Oh, I think it is ever closer than before for various reasons. For one, both countries are facing very similar challenges coming from shifting security environment, in particular regarding unpredictability of the Trump administration in the US and assertive China and the ongoing war in the Middle East and stronger and more dangerous North Korea. So these contexts provide similar challenges shared by both countries, but at the same time, the two leaders seem to enjoy and share great personal chemistry. And, the world witnessed the two leaders enjoying the drum session, and they were looking around the ancient temples in Nara, and they were exchanging jokes in Gyeongju. So great personal chemistry between the two leaders, but at the same time, similar strategic challenges. So both Korea and Japan have stronger motivations to get along with each other better than before. Mm-hmm. So this is their impairment, I think.
Right. So you've mentioned where they're seeing a very good chemistry between the two sides, and it just comes a couple of months since their last encounter, of course. So it's kind of another sign that the so-called shuttle diplomacy is back on track. How meaningful do you read into this? Like, how meaningful is this regular leader-to-leader engagement?
It is very important because, as we all know, both Korea and Japan have past records of encountering sudden freezes. Both countries sometimes had to cancel meetings, sometimes stop communications over various issues, territorial dispute, historical issues. There are still residuals of colonial legacies. So when the two leaders have close personal intimacy shared by each other, it is easier for both countries to just engage in casual, informal communications in order to break the impasse. So it is significant and meaningful. I believe.
Well, I just want to ask a quick question. I wonder, why do you think this summit is happening right now at this time around with this uncertainty happening?
The timing, I think, is pushing both leaders to get together and engage in brainstorming sessions. I mean, American President Trump and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping just had a summit meeting in Beijing, and the contents of the talks would have very serious implications for both countries regarding the Iranian war situation, which means potential blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, because both countries rely heavily on that particular passage in order to supply stable energy sources. And another thing is the rising danger of North Korea as nuclear power, and also its close alliance with Russia at the same time. So the two leaders really needed to get together and brainstorm the pressures, the challenges they both confront and share, and try to find ways out, how to address those challenges without provoking the big powers, in other words, China and the US. And of course, Russia is emerging as a strongest European power. So,
right.
I mean, they, as you have mentioned, they met. They got together in Nara Prefecture about 2 months ago. But you know, the shifting circumstances and the world moving very fast are motivating them to get together as soon as possible in amicable environment and commiserate their challenges as the leaders of the two countries.
Right. So having heard that, it seems like a very good timing to consult considering the geopolitical situation right now. Now, another thing to note is that this summit is taking place in President Lee's hometown of Andong. What kind of message do you think this actually reflects?
I think the messages are multi-layered. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the two leaders' commitment to even development of the regions, and try to stay away from preoccupation with the big cities, the capital cities like Seoul and Tokyo. And of course, there is an aspect of that in terms of choosing the summit meeting venue. But I think it's much more subtle and multi-layered in their choice of meeting venues. I mean, they got together in Nara Prefecture, which is Prime Minister Takaichi's hometown. And for today and tomorrow, it's going to be Andong, as you have mentioned. And why Andong? I mean, you know, we all know that Andong is not hub of diplomatic affairs. I mean, it's located in northern part of Gyeongsang Province, which is the southern part of South Korea. And I think the selection of the venue is an expression on the part of the South Korean government to show President Lee Jae-myung as a person. I mean, President Lee was born and raised in the city, and he's from a poor farm family, and that is the place which shaped and formed President Lee as a person before he continued on his various odd jobs at factories and his eventual pursuit of a license to practice law after graduating from law school and eventual entry into politics. So when Prime Minister Takaichi visits Andong, I think she gets to see President Lee as a person, as a little boy who grew up in the farmland, who saw the nature and hardships of ordinary people. And that the act of inviting the counterpart to his hometown actually entails two things, I think. One is he is willing to show his vulnerability to his counterpart. I'm from a poor family. Andong is not a big city. It is traditional and conservative, and this is who I am, and I'm willing to show you where I'm from. So this is about his biography, his life story. And another thing is, I think he wants to deliver his message that he trusts Prime Minister Takaichi, that even if he shows his vulnerabilities, the poor background and the rural area, Prime Minister Takaichi would not hold that against him. So it's I think two elements are working together. The courage to express the vulnerability, to open up the vulnerabilities, and trust in his counterpart, Prime Minister Takaichi, that she would see him as a person, as a human being, and he accept his life story. So it is multi-layered, it is subtle, it is strategic, but at the same time, it is very, very personable. The messages of warmth, trust, and accommodation and mutual understanding at personal level. And I think those things explain the particular choice of the venue for this summit meeting.
Right, so it really seems to add a strong personal element to this latest location. Now, it's also being viewed as a return gesture following the President Lee's visit to Takaichi's hometown of Nara earlier this year. So how important is these kinds of a personal diplomacy, Professor?
Actually, I think there are pros and cons. Personal diplomacy is indispensable for Korea-Japan relations, but at the same time, it is insufficient. What do I mean by indispensable? Personal level of intimacy between the two leaders is indispensable given the historical record of bilateral talks coming to sudden freezes. Whenever there was a small triggering momentum provoking domestic constituents in both societies, the leaders had to pay attention to those dissenting voices, and they had to halt the meetings. But when the two leaders have trust in each other, they can absorb those sudden shocks at the expense of their personal political capital. So in other words, they would be willing to take a risk of reducing their political capital vis-a-vis their domestic constituents, but their intimacy would help them to observe the shocks coming from unexpected flashpoints. So personal level diplomacy between the two leaders is indispensable for countries like Korea and Japan. I cannot emphasize it more. But it is insufficient at the same time. What do I mean by that? Personal level diplomacy can cease once the power changes hands. It needs institutionalization. It needs mechanisms to sustain and continue that kind of close coordination between the two leaders. So before their time is up, the two leaders would need to come up with mechanisms that would stabilize that kind of personal interactions. And your question reminds me of Kim Dae-jung and Obuchi friendship. Kim Dae-jung and Obuchi, both leaders in 1980s, were strongly committed to historical reconciliation between the two countries. They took the strong personal initiatives to come up with Obuchi Declaration, but when both those two leaders lost their power, it didn't continue. So I hope Prime Minister Takaichi and President Lee would learn from that kind of historical precedence in order to institutionalize the mechanism in order to continue this effective and helpful engagement.
Mm-hmm. So this personal diplomacy is quite important. It could be a booster and also a buffer. But what's really important, what you said, it's really it struck me. So it should continue until the next people get into power. It's a very necessary message for the two countries moving forward. Now, let's turn to the talks themselves today. The talks, it's ongoing, and the leaders are expected to focus on practical cooperation in areas like economy and public safety as well. Which areas do you expect to produce most tangible results, Professor?
You know, after having said all these symbolic significance and messages that this shuttle diplomacy sends out to both societies and to the region and the world, the two leaders still need to come up with tangible results. They need to show that they didn't waste time personalizing and socializing with each other, trying to make friends with each other. It's not going to be like that. So in order to yield a tangible result, they would focus on something pressing for both societies. Economic security, I think, is going to be the top priority. That is particularly so because of the ongoing war in Iran. I mean, both countries really need to stabilize the energy supply. So that would be one of the tangible results. I mean, if two of them get together and send a strong signal to the stakeholders of the Iran war, I think finding truth or the conclusion of the war would be easier and more effective. And another thing is people-to-people engagement. That is going to be another tangible result they can harvest from the summit meeting. Because no matter how friendly the two leaders become, at the end of the day, in liberal democracy, it's going to be the voters who are going to determine their fate. So they would need to persuade and convince their domestic constituents that because of this close coordination, your life is going to be safer, you are going to be richer, and things will become better. So in that context, the talks of public safety, such as how to respond to natural disasters like earthquakes and tsunami, for instance, and how to promote people-to-people exchanges. I remember that during the Nara summit meeting, the two leaders talked about not only promotion of tourism, but also promoting a school field trip for the kids. I mean, this is going to be a very future-oriented and a very people-to-people based diplomacy. So these kinds of tangible results would have bigger impact on the part of Korean as well as Japanese citizens.
Right, and it really circles back to what you said a while ago. So keeping this reconciliatory momentum moving forward, and we will be able to see those kinds of cooperations as well. But so beyond this bilateral ties, regional security is also being high on the agenda, especially after this is coming after the US-China summit. We're aware of that. So what do you think Seoul and Tokyo are most focused on strategically right now?
Oh, the regional security architecture is shifting dramatically. More assertive China. China is not shy about sending out warning messages to Japan, which used to claim itself to be the leader of Northeast Asia. So China is trying hard to check and balance what Japan is doing. And China is one factor. Another thing, another dynamic, I think, regards the Taiwan situation. American President Donald Trump and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping talked about Taiwan. And I personally do not think the two leaders will openly talk about Taiwan because it's going to be a button pusher. Because over that particular issue, China and Japan clashed. And if Korea and Japan discuss the Taiwan issue, it's going to get not only complicated, but difficult. Because Taiwan has been used as some sort of like litmus test for American allies in East Asia, whether they are willing to align with the US. And of course, it is highly ideological. I mean, liberal democracy, so we should take side with Taiwan. But it's much more complicated in realistic terms because we all know how China feels about Taiwan, historically, strategically, symbolically. So Taiwan would be another issue that would not be articulated in open forum, but that creates some sort of like undercurrent between the two leaders' talks, I think. And another important variable here, I think, is North Korea. North Korea is becoming more provocative. I mean, just for the last month, North Korea conducted more than dozen ballistic missile tests and others. So North Korea is becoming a lot more daring, bold, provocative. And why is it acting like that? Because it has backings of Russia by sending its troops and by providing military supplies to the Iranian war, you know, for the sake of Russia. And China is also backing North Korea as well. So the regional stakeholders, Korea, Japan, have to pay attention to the faraway country like the US. Of course, it is still the strongest country in the world and the most powerful military in the world. It's going to change, some people say, but you know, we'll have to watch. But Russia is becoming emboldened, and North Korea is doing much better militarily and economically, and the leadership positions seem to be more consolidated than before. And the conflict over Taiwan and China's assertiveness and its persistence over its claim over the Taiwanese territory, all these, I think, play important roles in describing today's regional security architecture.
Right, definitely. You've mentioned a very important topics like assertive China, Taiwan, and also growing threats from North Korea. So if we start with China, Professor, President Trump, we are aware that he separately briefed the leaders of Seoul and Tokyo following his meeting with President Xi. So what does that tell us about Korea, US-Japan coordination right now?
I think President Trump cares about how his actions are perceived by Korea and Japan more than we expect. Why? Because the act of briefing in and of itself is not only sharing information, but also try to calm the high level of anxiety as the middle powers of the region. So I think Mr. Trump knows and understands how vulnerable and anxious Korea and Japan can be when he deals with the big country of the region, China. So he briefed Japan on May 15. And as soon as he left China, he called Prime Minister Takaichi from Air Force One. So, according to Prime Minister Takaichi's press conference remarks with domestic Japanese press, she said quite a lot of details were shared with her by President Trump. So he cared to fill in Prime Minister Takaichi on May 15. As for President Trump's briefing of the US-China summit meeting, it took them 2 days for him to brief President Lee. It took them 2 days, and we have to ask, I mean, you know, as soon as he got on Air Force One, he bothered to pick up the phone and shared information with Prime Minister Takaichi. And why did it take 2 days for him to brief President Lee? And I think it reflects consideration on the part of the American administration. And what do I mean by consideration? President Trump and Xi Jinping talked about North Korea, and in particular nuclear North Korea. And they needed to take some time in order to adjust the tone and content of their talks on North Korea.
Professor, I'm sorry, I really apologize to interrupt, but we have to turn over to the scene. They're going to start the joint statement right now. We'll continue our discussion after the statement. So we're seeing the two leaders, the leaders of South Korea and Japan. They're about to speak on the podium, and they're going to deliver their joint press statement. Let's take a listen.
A sincere welcome to Prime Minister Takaichi and her Japanese delegation to Korea. 4 months after my visit to Nara, the Prime Minister's hometown in January, Prime Minister Takaichi has paid a visit to Andong, which is my hometown. This marks the first time that the leaders of Korea and Japan have visited each other's hometowns, and it is something rarely seen anywhere in the world. I believe that the fact such a meaningful and historic exchange has taken place in just 4 months speaks to the depth and strength of the friendship and ties shared by our two countries. I also find it especially meaningful that shuttle diplomacy, once centered mainly on Seoul and Tokyo, has now expanded to regional cities such as Busan, Gyeongju, Nara, and Andong. Annual people-to-people exchanges between our two countries have now reached 13 million, and young people from both nations are actively visiting one another in search of unique charms of our regional communities. Now, the two countries' relations are now expanding beyond our capitals and opening a new chapter across every corner of our societies. At today's summit, Prime Minister Takaichi and I had candid discussions on a wide range of issues as strategic partners responding together to rapidly changing global circumstances, building on the trust that we have developed through shuttle diplomacy. In particular, we share the view that recent instability in supply chains and energy markets stemming from the developments in the Middle East has made close cooperation between our two countries more important than ever. We also agreed that peace and stability in the Middle East should be restored as soon as possible. Based on such shared understanding, our two countries reviewed the progress made under the Korea-Japan Supply Chain Partnership signed last March and agreed to further expand supply chain cooperation. Prime Minister Takaichi also proposed that Korea and Japan work closely together to deepen resource supply chain cooperation with other Asian countries facing similar challenges. I expressed my support and reaffirmed our commitment to actively participate in such efforts. In addition, we agreed to further strengthen cooperation in LNG and crude oil, two key energy resources. Building on the LNG supply cooperation agreement signed last March, we agreed to expand LNG cooperation and further deepen information sharing and communication channels related to crude oil supply and reserves. Amid rapidly changing global circumstances, we also reaffirmed the importance of Korea-Japan and Korea-US-Japan cooperation in promoting regional peace and stability. In this regard, we welcomed the recent elevation of the Korea-Japan security policy dialogue to the vice ministerial level for the first time and viewed it as a meaningful step forward. I also emphasized that Northeast Asia is deeply interconnected across many areas, including the economy and security, and that genuine peace and stability in the region require Korea, China, and Japan to respect one another, cooperate closely, and pursue common interests together. We also exchanged in-depth views on the situation on the Korean Peninsula. I explained that my government's vision of building a peaceful Korean Peninsula where there is no need for conflict, one where North and South Korea coexist peacefully and grow together. Next, we noted progress in practical cooperation measures discussed during our January summit through active communication at all levels and agreed to further expand future-oriented cooperation. I also noted that by building a strategic and mutually beneficial foundation for cooperation in AI based on our respective strengths, our businesses and people can play a leading role in shaping a global AI-basic society. We also held in-depth discussions on cooperation in advanced technologies such as space exploration and biotechnology. The two countries further agreed to strengthen cooperation to protect the lives and safety of our people. In particular, the memorandum between our national police agencies on jointly responding to transnational scam crimes will significantly improve the speed and effectiveness of investigations and provide a stronger foundation for protecting our citizens. We also agreed to continue discussions on cooperation in personal information protection to safeguard people's rights and ensure public safety in the AI era. DNA analysis of remains excavated from the Josei coal mine in Japan will begin soon. Through close working-level consultations, our diplomatic authorities have reached agreement on the specific procedures and methods for conducting the analysis. This will be a small but meaningful first step toward cooperation on humanitarian issues in addressing historical issues between our two countries. The opportunities for cooperation between Korea and Japan remain limitless. I hope our two countries will continue creating people-centered forms of cooperation that allow us to prosper together and enable our citizens to directly benefit from the experience. Including today's summit, Prime Minister Takaichi and I have now met 4 times over the past 7 months. This demonstrates that shuttle diplomacy, where leaders can meet and communicate whenever necessary without being constrained by formality, has now firmly taken root. As Korea and Japan enter a new chapter in the next 60 years of our relationship, I hope we will continue expanding future-oriented cooperation that delivers real benefits for our people. Once again, I warmly welcome Honorable Prime Minister Takaichi to Korea and look forward to meeting again soon in another beautiful region of Japan for continued candid communication. Thank you. Next, we would like to hear from Prime Minister Takaichi.
高市早苗日本内閣総理大臣からご発言いただきます。
皆様こんにちは。
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank President Lee Jae-myung for his warm hospitality to myself and my delegation. In particular, it is a pleasure to meet here in Andong, which is the hometown of the president, and it is a great pleasure. So it was last time in Nara and this time in Andong, in our both hometowns, and without any time delays, we are holding this shuttle diplomacy, and with this, I can feel that our friendship and trust has deepened. And the culture and this beautiful scenery in Andong, it is such a pleasure and a delight to visit this city, and I'd like to thank President Lee. The global circumstances are fluctuating and it is unstable, and amidst this, it is very meaningful that we are continuing this communication between the two countries. So against this backdrop, myself and President Lee, not only our bilateral relations, but also the Middle East circumstances and the Pacific region landscapes were the ones that we talked about. And we also agreed that in order to that we will do our utmost to the stabilization of the Hormuz Straits and the Middle East developments and the peace and stability, to promote the peace and stability in the Middle East. We are going to proactively and preemptively react to the stability of the Middle East, and we have shared the view. And also the critical minerals, including that, it is important that we stabilize the supply chain stability, and we have noted the MOUs that we had signed in March, and we also noted that this will be executed as planned. And also the peace in Indo-Pacific region, and also the bilateral relations, and also the autonomy of the two countries and the stability of the supply chain of the two countries. It is important that we conduct our role and what we have to do. And in the Indo-Pacific region, energy support, reinforcement of the energy support, and LNG swap transaction, including all this, the energy security, strengthening the energy security of the two nations. We agreed that we will look into tangible steps forward in this regard. Also, the AI, which is also our task and also our opportunity, and including that about the economic landscape of the two countries that will contribute to the two nations' economic development. And we also agreed that we will cooperate in this regard. And structural scam and these crimes are the challenges that our two nations are facing. And so in this regard, we will address this transnational scam crimes. And also, last month, this security policy dialogue between the two countries had been escalated to the vice ministerial level, which is something that we welcome, and we are going to work on this so that this will continue in the future. Together with President Lee and myself, we have shared our views and we have agreed that the strategic partnership between the two countries and also the three countries, including the US, and with our cooperation, the trilateral cooperation will continue and will strengthen, and to this end we will cooperate and will share information about North Korea, including the nuclear and missile issues. We also talked about the North Korean issue, and we will closely coordinate to respond to North Korea issue. And also, I'd like to thank President Lee for his support in our efforts as well. And today, with today's talks for the international peace and prosperity, we are sure that our cooperation can contribute to the regional, not only the regional, but the global peace and prosperity. And we don't have time differences, and whenever we have any issues, we can also pick up the phone, and we promise that we will stay very close in contact, and next time we are going to ask President Lee to visit Japan, to a beautiful region of Japan. So thank you very much.
이상으로 공동 언론 발표를 마치겠습니다. 참석해 주신
This
언론인
concludes
여러분
the joint
감사합니다.
press
以上をもちま
statement.
して
Thank you
共
very
同記
much.
者発表を終了いたします。ご出席いただきましたプレスの皆様ありがとうございます。
Now, that was our live coverage of the ROK-Japan and leaders' joint statement. It seems there's a lot of MOUs and a lot of agreements between the two. Let's return to our talks with Professor Kim. So, Professor, I wonder, having heard all of these announcements, I wonder what stood out for you the most?
Two things. One, commonalities shared by the two leaders. I mean, both of them commonly emphasized several issues such as energy security, resource supply chain expansion, and AI, global infrastructure, and mutual cooperation in order to protect personal information, and in that context, as an extension of that, space exploration. And both of them talked about the importance of peaceful coexistence among vying countries, Korea, Japan, China, and also North Korea. transnational scam prevention and MOU signed between the two police agencies, and Chosei mines, excavation of the remains of forced laborers, Korean forced laborers during the colonial era. These were the common topics. Another thing that struck me was about the additions made by Prime Minister Takaichi. She mentioned information sharing between the two countries with particular relevance on North Korea's nuclear capabilities. She is asking Seoul to share what's happening to North Korea and what's happening to its nuclear capabilities, which President Lee didn't mention. And of course, Japan, still a pacifist country without nuclear capabilities, should be wary of what North Korea is up to. And Japan wants to know, and Japan wants to get the information from South Korea. And I'm not so sure whether the Lee administration would be willing to share that kind of sensitive information while fully knowing that it's going to provoke the Pyongyang regime. So that drew my attention. And another one was Prime Minister Takaichi's mentioning of Japanese abduction issues. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, North Korea, during the Kim Jong-il era, abducted Japanese citizens to North Korea. And some of them are still remaining, still kept captive in North Korea. And the families, they are aging, and they really want to get reunited with the abduction victims of Japanese citizens. So this is a hot topic for domestic Japan, and Prime Minister Takaichi is asking South Korean government to show sympathy and cooperate with this humanitarian concern. And those two things caught my attention.
Right. So it seems that North Korea is quite high on the interest of Japan, as we saw in their speech. But when we look beyond today's ceremony, today's joint statement, what should we watch for to, closely to gauge the relationship between Korea and Japan moving forward?
Two things. Continuity. Continuity through institutionalization of this shuttle diplomacy. Once these two leaders go away from the top power position, their successors should inherit what they accomplished and continue on. And that is going to be a brilliant and wonderful template for personal level of diplomacy between the two countries with unresolved, lingering grievances. And second one, I think, has something to do with priorities. Instead of accentuating the differences and disagreements, the two countries would need to find the common ground so that they can start working from those commonalities and harvest the tangible results as their accomplishments, and then move on instead of accentuating the disagreements and cacophonies between the two. So how to achieve the second goal? I think it has something to do with restraining from imposing respective priorities on each other. For instance, Japan is preoccupied with nuclear North Korea and is asking for information about that. And that puts Seoul in very tricky position. So instead of pressuring Seoul in order to satisfy its own needs for sensitive information, Japan would be wise exploring alternative routes to get that kind of sensitive information by freeing South Korea from North Korea's accusation that it is pro-Japan, it is pro-US, and that's going to be counterproductive for the peace and prosperity of the peninsula. And another thing is, South Korea, I think, would need to be sensitive and very careful in addressing the Taiwan issue. Even though Japan sees it as a matter of existence, you know, when something happens to Taiwan, it's going to be a threat to Japan's existence. Japan would be careful not to get South Korea entangled and involved in that conflict in order to gain more support, in order to gain more power in its policy priority. So that kind of consideration for each other's priorities, each other's positions, I think would be necessary in order to sustain this kind of friendly atmosphere and exchanges between the two countries, even though in short term it's going to be difficult because it's not going to pay off. But in long and mid-term perspective, it's going to be helpful for both countries for the sake of peace and prosperity of the region.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for highlighting those sticking points, Professor Kim. We really appreciate your insights and your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
So as we've discussed, today's summit carried both diplomatic significance and a strong symbolism. But ultimately, the key question now seems to be whether today's atmosphere would lead to sustained cooperation on regional security, economic coordination, and people-to-people ties moving forward. That wraps up our special coverage of the Korea-Japan Summit and Joint Statement from Andong. Thank you so much for watching.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right.